In 2019, Airdrop, a feature on iOS devices that allowed users to share photos, videos, and files with nearby devices, went live. This proved to be both a blessing and a curse. Convenient, sure, but in the wrong hands it could be downright terrifying. In Japan, a disturbing trend had emerged, strangers sending explicit images via airdrop to unsuspecting commuters on public transport. People called it airdrop harassment. This story isn't about explicit images, though. It's something much worse. Mina was a temporary worker at a mid-sized firm in Tokyo. Her daily routine was a grind: packed trains, hurried lunches, and long hours in a cramped office. The only respite she had was the commute, where she could get lost in her phone, scrolling through social media or reading articles. One Thursday morning, Mina got lucky and found a seat on the train. It was rare, and she took full advantage of it. She sat there zoning out to the sound of the clattering tracks. As her eyelids grew heavy, a notification popped up on her screen. Airdrop, file received. Half asleep, she tapped it without thinking. Her screen blinked, and then an image loaded. It was black, completely black. At first, she thought it was just a mistake or maybe a failed file transfer. Squinting at the screen, she turned up the brightness, but it made no difference. Shrugging it off, she deleted the file and went back to scrolling. The next morning, the train was even more packed than usual. Mina clung to a pole, trying to keep her balance, while refreshing her social feed. That's when it happened again. Airdrop, file received. This time she declined the request, but the airdrop preview still flashed on her screen for a split second before disappearing. It was another black image. She furrowed her brow with concern. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was sending these files deliberately. She felt a bit freaked out. She glanced around the train, scanning the sea of faces: businessmen buried in newspapers, students scrolling on their phone, an older woman sat staring her way quietly. No one seemed out of place, but Mina's skin prickled. Someone here had sent it. By the third day, Mina was on edge. She had thought about it for much of the night before, replaying the strange event in her mind. She adjusted her airdrop settings to block strangers, thinking that would put an end to it. But as soon as she boarded the train, her paranoia spiked. She could feel someone watching her. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Then, as the train pulled out of the station, it happened again. Another airdrop. Mina froze. She hadn't even noticed her settings had been switched back. Her hand hovered over the decline button. But curiosity got the better of her. She accepted the file. It was another black image. But this time, Mina noticed something strange. When she tilted her phone at an angle, she could see faint, uneven lines, like something was hidden beneath the darkness. She took a screenshot before quickly deleting the file. When she arrived at work, Mina confided in her coworker, Sayaka, about the strange airdrop images. "Let me see the screenshot," Sayaka said. Mina handed over her phone, relief washing over her as Sayaka took charge. "I know someone who's good with image editing. They can take a look." That night, Mina couldn't shake the feeling of being followed as she walked home from the train station. Every time she turned around, the street was empty, but the feeling lingered. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary, felt oppressive. She triple-checked the locks before crawling into bed, her heart racing. The next morning, Sayaka was waiting for her, the moment she walked into the office. "Mina?" she said, her voice trembling. "You need to see this." Sayaka handed Mina her phone. The edited version of the image was displayed on the screen. Mina's stomach dropped. The blackness was a filter, masking a horrifying scene. The photo was of a decrepit, abandoned room. The walls were plastered with yellowed talismans, hundreds of them, each covered in jagged, unfamiliar symbols. But it wasn't the talismans that made Mina's knees buckle. It was what stood in the corner of the room. A figure. Its limbs were impossibly long, its face obscured by shadows. The head was cocked at an unnatural angle, as if it had just noticed the camera. "What the hell is this?" Mina whispered, her voice barely audible. Sayaka shook her head, her expression pale. "I don't know, but whoever sent it to you, it's deliberate." Panic set in. Mina deleted the screenshot and tried to convince herself that it was just some sick prank. But as the day went on, she couldn't focus. That image, those talismans, that thing was burned into her mind. On the way home, she took a different train, hoping to avoid whoever had sent the files. But the unease followed her every step, every creak in the train car, every glance from a stranger felt loaded with menace. Mina never received another airdrop file after that, but the fear never left her. Even now, years later, she feels uneasy on the train. Sometimes she senses eyes on her, but whenever she looks, there's no one there. And how do I know all this? Well, Mina's my sister, and I worry about her. That's why I'm sharing her story here, to see if there's anybody who's experienced anything similar. Late night, when she's all alone in her apartment, she says she has had dreams of that room. The walls covered in talismans. The figure in the corner, watching, waiting for her. This story is something a friend told me a couple of years back. I can't say for sure if it's true, but it stuck with me. At the time, I heard bits and pieces of it as it was happening, so I got a front row seat to the weirdness. It's not terrifying, but it's definitely unsettling, and a story that lingered on my mind. So my friend worked in a small company. Nothing fancy, just a regular office job. One weird rule at his workplace was that during lunch breaks, everyone had to turn off their computers. I guess it was some kind of energy-saving measure or company policy, but my friend was always forgetting to do it. Instead, he'd just leave his computer on and head out for lunch. No big deal, right? After a few times of doing this, though, he started noticing something odd. Even though he had always had a screensaver set, one of those basic ones that pops up after a few minutes of inactivity, so the bosses know when you're skiving. When he came back from lunch, the screensaver was gone and his desktop screen would be visible. At first he thought someone might have been using his computer. Lunch breaks weren't perfectly synchronized, there was always a few minutes of overlap where people were coming and going, so he asked around, casually checking if anyone had been near his desk, but everyone swore that they hadn't touched his computer. Even the people who brought their lunch and stayed in the office ate in a different area. No one had any reason to be at his desk. Still, it bugged him. He knew how screensavers worked. A slight bump of the mouse or key press was enough to deactivate it. But why would it only happen during lunch breaks and not at any other times? And why didn't it happen on the nights when he accidentally left the computer on after working late? Those mornings, the screensaver was always still active. It was weird, but not weird enough to make a fuss about. He brushed it off as some glitch or maybe just paranoia. A few weeks later, something happened that made it harder to ignore. One day my friend spilled coffee, or maybe it was tea, on his mouse. It wasn't completely fried, but it was acting up enough to be annoying. Instead of dealing with it, he decided to buy a new mouse during his lunch break. So before heading out, he unplugged the old mouse and left it on his desk. When he got back with the new mouse, the screensaver was off again. That didn't make any sense. There was no way the screensaver could have been deactivated without a mouse plugged in. Or so he thought. I remember asking him at this point, "Are you sure you just didn't accidentally change the screensaver settings?" But he swore up and down he hadn't touched anything. I'm not even sure our company allows us to tinker with the settings anyway. Feeling uneasy, he decided to ask a coworker who was good with computers to take a look. He ran through everything, the settings, background programs, even potential security software notifications, but there was nothing. The computer seemed totally normal. To test it further, my friend decided to try something new. The next day before leaving for lunch, he opened a blank Word document and left the computer on, just to see what would happen. And when he came back, his heart dropped. The document was filled with so, repeated over and over again. It covered the entire screen. Hi, Jay here. So, with hiragana, so is a character comprised of 2 letters, and there is a small su, which indicates a pause. So it's like so, like that. I'll put a visual on the screen now if you'd like to see what appeared on his Word document. This should help contextualize things. Back to the story. At this point, he was genuinely freaked out. Repeating the character's "so" looked strange. It was like the computer was typing on its own. Thinking the keyboard might be faulty, he replaced it with a new one. That seemed to fix the problem. Well, at least for a while. But a few weeks later, it happened again. He forgot to turn the computer off before lunch, and when he came back, the desktop screen was visible. Suspicious, he tried the Word document experiment again. This time, the screen was once again filled with lines of repeating so. He thought it was some kind of virus, so he ran a full diagnostic, wiped the system, and even reset the computer to its factory settings, after backing up everything, of course. Nothing worked. And here's the kicker. The problem only ever happened on his computer. No one else in the office experienced anything similar. The creepiest part happened a few days later. By now, my friend was on edge. He started leaving Word open regularly, just to monitor the situation. One day after lunch, he found a document filled with something different. Instead of so, the screen was covered with so, repeated endlessly. At this point, it wasn't in hiragana, but in English. At first, he didn't think much of it, and then he realized something. He'd switched the computer to English input mode that day. The repeating "so" had been replaced with SOS. It was spelling out SOSOSOSOS over and over and over again. He started digging deeper, desperate to figure out what was going on. That's when he learned something chilling about the building. There had been a fire. It happened around lunchtime, right near the window where my friend's desk was now located. A group of people had been trapped. At least one person, a foreigner, possibly from China or Korea, had died in that exact spot. Through smoke inhalation. Rumor has it that the previous company was considered a black company. After learning that, my friend couldn't shake the feeling that the computer was trying to communicate something to him. Maybe it was a cry for help. Maybe it was just an echo of the past. Whatever it was, it really left him shaken. Eventually, the manager of the office decided to rearrange the seating plan. My friend's desk was moved, and the area near the window was converted into a small meeting place. To be safe, someone even put up a protective charm, an ofura, on the wall. After that, the strange occurrences seemed to stop. My friend never experienced anything like it again, though he was always sure to turn off his computer at lunch from then on. Sometimes I think about what happened to him, and I wonder, was it just a glitch, a malfunctioning keyboard, or was there really something, or someone trying to reach out? Who knows? But one thing's for sure, if your computer starts acting weird, maybe don't ignore it. It might just be someone attempting to reach out from the beyond. Back in 2020, I was living alone in a small rental apartment in Furukawa, Miyagi Prefecture. It wasn't glamorous, but it was cozy enough for someone like me, just starting fresh in a new job. I'd been living with my family before the move, so the shift to solitude was both exciting and intimidating. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes with being surrounded by families who kept themselves to themselves. It suited me. I'd always thought of myself as independent, but being truly alone was a new experience. At night, though, when the neighborhood was still and the shadows stretched across the walls, I sometimes found myself missing the comfort of home, a voice in the next room, the sound of someone moving about, or a friendly face coming through the door. The rainy season didn't help. The air was thick and muggy, the kind of heat that clung to your skin and made sleep near impossible. Most nights I tossed and turned, my sheets twisted around me. By morning I'd drag myself to work bleary-eyed and heavy-limbed, wondering if I'd ever adjust to this new lifestyle. It started one night in mid-June. I was half asleep, staring at the ceiling and counting down the hours until my alarm would ring. Suddenly, the silence of my apartment was broken by a loud mechanical noise. I recognized the sound almost instantly. It was my fax machine. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, totally confused. Now, I didn't use the fax machine often. It was there mainly for work, and the only people who had that number were my office and my parents. So I couldn't think of any reason why someone would be sending me a fax at this hour. I shuffled out of bed and into the living room, and by the time I got there the noise had stopped. The machine sat silent and still, its paper tray empty. I checked the logs, nothing. No record of an incoming call or message, no number displayed. I stared at the machine, my tired brain struggling to make sense of it. Was it a glitch? Had I dreamed the sound? I shook my head and decided to let it go, heading back to bed. Still, it made me feel a little weird. The next morning I checked the fax machine again. Nothing had changed, no paper, no record of any activity. At work I casually mentioned it to my co-workers, trying to find out if anyone had tried to send me something late at night. They just gave me puzzled looks and shook their heads. Later I called my parents, just to be sure. A fax? At midnight? No, of course not, my mum said. Who sends faxes anymore anyway? Her dismissal was meant to be reassuring, but it left me with more questions than answers. Maybe it was just a mistake, I told myself. A misdial, a glitch. I wanted to find out the answer, but I knew I just had to move on. About 10 days later, it happened again. It was the same routine. Late at night, the strange whirring noise pulling me out of a restless sleep. This time I didn't rush to check. Instead I lay in bed, my heart pounding as I stared at the ceiling. Not again, I whispered to myself. When the noise stopped, I reluctantly got up and went to the living room. Just like before, the paper tray was empty. No sender, no number, nothing. I stood there, in the dim light, staring at the machine. I'll be honest, I felt a little creeped out by that machine. I know it's such a mad thing to say. This wasn't a glitch though. I knew that it couldn't be. The calls didn't stop. They came sporadically, always at night, always leaving no trace. By autumn, I'd started to dread the sound of the machine. The shrill electronic whine would jolt me awake, and I'd lie there paralyzed, waiting for it to stop. I'd unplug it, but I actually needed it for work. Sometimes we would get an early morning memo or something from the office that we had to be reactive to. Plus, I didn't really feel like going into the office one morning, explaining to my seniors why I missed their message, so it stayed plugged in and on. I started to feel like I was being watched. The shadows in my apartment seemed darker, the silence heavier. I kept the lights on at night and double-checked the locks on my doors and windows. But no matter what I did, the fax calls kept coming. By winter, I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And by March in 2011, I decided to move back closer to be with my family. It wasn't just getting woke up by some fax machine. It was a lot of other things. Work had been taking a toll on me. More so than I realized. It was non-stop and I had so many duties and expectations to live up to. I needed a fresh start. I found a new apartment and I started making arrangements with the real estate office. One weekday in March, I took a day off to run some errands. I stopped at a gas station to fill up my tank, knowing I'd be driving around a lot that day. Just as I was pulling out of that gas station, my phone rang. It was the real estate office. I answered, but all I could hear was static. And beneath it, a faint familiar sound. It was the whine of a fax machine. Confused, I hung up. Moments later, the same number called again. This time, I didn't bother answering. As I drove towards a large supermarket, my mind raced. Why would the real estate office send a fax to my phone? It didn't make any sense. I parked outside the store, still trying to make sense of it. And that was when the ground beneath me started to shake. At 2:46 p.m. on March 11th, 2011, the East Japan earthquake struck. It's impossible to describe the sheer terror of that moment. The earth roared, the pavement buckled, and the world seemed to come apart at the seams. Inside the supermarket, people screamed as shelves toppled and glass shattered. Outside, cars rocked violently, their alarms blaring. I clung to the side of my car, my knees shaking, unable to stand. When the shaking finally stopped, I looked at the supermarket. The building was unrecognizable. Its roof caved in, windows blown out. If not for that strange call, I would have 100% been inside there. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about that fax machine. I asked the real estate office about the call, but they insisted they hadn't tried to contact me that day. Was it a coincidence, a glitch, or something else entirely? I'll never know for sure. The earthquake left a deep scar on my life. Most lives, actually. My apartment building was badly damaged and I couldn't return. The roads were destroyed and it took me hours to reach my family, but I was alive. And to this day, I keep that gas station receipt from that afternoon, stamped 2:35 p.m., just minutes before the quake. It's a reminder of how close I came to disaster, and how something or someone might have been looking out for me. The fax machine, oddly enough, survived the quake. I kept that thing for years, but after that day, it never acted up again. Sometimes I think about this strange sequence of events, the midnight calls, the inexplicable warnings. Part of me wants to dismiss it as a coincidence, but another part believes it was something more. Whatever it was, I'm grateful. Life is fragile, unpredictable. It's easy to take the small, strange moments for granted, but sometimes they're the ones that matter the most. So, this happened last year. It's a long story, but I need to get it off my chest. My phone was acting up, so I took it to the shop to get it fixed. They told me they'd need to send it out for repair. They couldn't fix it in the shop, but they didn't have a replacement phone for me to use either. I was just about to leave and try another store when the youngest staff member, a girl, pulled out a phone and asked, "Can't we let him use this?" It was the same make and model as my phone, so it was convenient for me. But the moment she showed it, the other staff started whispering to each other, looking unsure. I caught bits and pieces of what they were saying. Is it okay? Should we really give him that? What if it happens again? I didn't want to go through the hassle of finding another shop. So I cut in and said, "Look, it's fine. Even if it's a little buggy. As long as I can take calls, I'm good." Eventually they handed over the phone. Now, anyone who's ever borrowed a replacement phone knows they always reset it before giving it to you. The staff confirmed it was wiped clean, and I signed the paperwork. When I got home and started messing with it, I noticed something. The call history wasn't empty. There was a single outgoing call to a number I didn't recognize, and it was dated 6 months earlier. I double-checked the phone's date and time settings, and they were correct. I hadn't made any calls with a replacement phone yet, so where had this come from? Still, I brushed it off. Maybe it was some leftover data the reset hadn't cleared. The next day, I was emailing a friend using the replacement phone. At one point, I accidentally hit a button that took me from the newest email to the very oldest in the inbox, and that's when I found it. An email from 6 months ago that I definitely hadn't seen before. The email was tied to the phone number rather than my personal email address. It was a simple message with no sender name, no subject, just a single line of text on a black screen, on a black background with orange letters. "Can you see me?" It read. I was intrigued, so I replied, "When did you send this?" As soon as I hit send, I got an error message saying that the email couldn't be delivered. But right after that, a new email popped up in my inbox. This one also had a black background with orange text. "Now," it said. I tried sending a few more messages, but they all bounced back with errors, and every time I got another response, I got a response right after. It was always in that eerie format. Through these exchanges, I managed to piece together a little about the sender. She claimed to be a woman in her 20s living alone. But as curious as I was, the whole thing started to feel off. It was exciting at first and kind of mysterious, but it seemed like bad news. I decided to stop replying. The next morning, I woke up to find the phone's notification light blinking. I figured it was just the usual junk emails or newsletters, but when I checked, there were dozens of messages from the mystery sender. "Can you see me? Why aren't you looking? Are you ignoring me?" It was getting way too creepy. I deleted all the messages, blocked the sender, and put the phone away. That afternoon, I remembered the email I had found the day before, the one from 6 months ago. For some reason, I opened it again, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The orange text was actually a hyperlink. I couldn't help it. I was so curious, I tapped it. It opened a map, Google Maps to be exact, and the location it pointed to, my home. I wasn't at home at the time I clicked the link, so this wasn't some current location thing. It was a specific, pinned location, my house. And this was in an email supposedly sent 6 months ago. I froze. A chill ran down my spine. And that's when another email came in. No sound, no vibration, just the notification quietly appearing on the screen. "Did you see it?" The emails kept coming. "I'm cold. It's so dark here. Why won't anyone come?" No matter what I did, I couldn't stop them. Blocking didn't work, deleting didn't help, and the most unnerving thing, the emails came in complete silence. No notification sounds, no vibration, no nothing. They were just there. I started to think maybe someone was playing a sick joke on me, but the timestamps and the way the emails bypassed the usual phone settings didn't make any sense, so I decided to return the phone. At the shop, while I was going through the return process, one of the staff noticed an unread email on the replacement phone. She opened it without thinking, which I thought was quite bold, and then she froze. It was time-stamped for that exact moment, and it simply said, "Don't leave me alone." Attached to the email was a photo. It was completely black, except for what looked like a faint, blurry reflection of a face. The staff member's face went pale. She quickly reset the phone without saying a word, completed the return, and handed it back to me. I didn't press for details. I just wanted to leave and put the whole thing behind me. But something about the number in the call log stuck with me. I decided to write it down. A few days later, I showed a friend who worked in IT. I figured he'd find it interesting or be able to trace it. The moment he saw the number, his expression changed. Hang on, I got an idea. He pulled out his laptop, typed in the number into a search engine, and within seconds his face dropped. The number's listed on a public database for a missing person. It belongs to one of the active investigations. What the hell is this about? My stomach dropped. What database? There's a registry for these cases where authorities are trying to crowdsource information. Numbers associated with missing person cases are sometimes published, asking people to come forward if they've had contact. The explanation felt plausible, but it only made things worse. I explained the story of the replacement phone, the eerie call history, and the emails. My friend looked spooked but didn't say much, other than a quiet suggestion. Maybe you should call the number. I hesitated for days, but late one night, unable to shake the feeling that I was somehow tied to this mystery, I gave in, and I dialed the number. It rang twice before someone answered. The party who answered remained silent until I said, "Hello? This is Detective Tanaka, Kanagawa Prefectural Police. Who's this?" I froze, my voice faltering. I found this phone on a phone I borrowed. I found this number on a phone I borrowed, I mean. It was already in the call history. I didn't know it was connected to a missing person case. There was a long pause before the detective spoke again. How long have you had this number? I stammered through the story about the replacement phone, the emails, the photo, and his response chilled me. This number was assigned to a woman who disappeared 6 months ago. Her last known location was her apartment, but her phone was never recovered. Whoever used that phone before you wasn't her. The timeline doesn't match. What does that mean? I asked. We've been receiving intermittent calls from this number since she went missing. But no one ever speaks, just static. Sometimes we hear what sounds like breathing. But you're telling me the calls didn't originate from her device? My heart pounded. Before I could say anything else, he added one last thing. If you receive any further messages or calls from that number, notify us immediately. Whatever you do, don't answer them. That night, as I lay in bed, I checked my phone's call log, out of habit. There it was, an outgoing call to the same number. I live alone, and my phone has been sitting untouched on my nightstand the whole time. I don't know what to do. It doesn't feel like it's over. This story isn't mine. It happened to a friend, Riku, a few years ago. To this day, I don't know how much of it I believe, but he was so shaken when he told me that I can't just dismiss it. Riku worked for a small computer recycling company in Tokyo. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. His job was straightforward. Old computers would come in, and his team would strip them for usable parts. Riku's focus was the hard drives. He'd wipe them clean or dispose of them if they were too far gone. One day, while going through his usual routine, he found a hard drive that hadn't been formatted. Normally, protocol dictated that he wipe it immediately, but the monotony of his job was getting to him. Curious and frankly bored, he decided to take a peek at its contents. The drive was small, only 2.1 gigabytes, and it was mostly filled with low-quality adult images. Laughing to himself, Riku copied the files onto some blank CDRs, figuring he'd go through them later for some entertainment. That night he sat at his desk, sifting through the images. Most were exactly what he expected, grainy, badly lit photos that weren't worth the effort. But then he found something unusual. An image of a map. It wasn't a typical map though. It was rough, almost hand-drawn, showing a remote area in the mountains. Near the edge of the map, an X was marked in bold red. Riku couldn't explain why, but the map ignited something in him, a mix of curiosity and excitement. What could be buried there? He imagined cash, rare collectibles, or maybe even some hidden stash of spicy material. The possibilities were endless. That weekend, armed with a printout of the map and a shovel, Riku set off. He'd invited me to join him, but I had work and I couldn't go. Plus, even if I was free, it just kind of felt weird to me. I didn't really want to go hunting for some stranger's spicy favorites, but I do wish I had gone with him. Now, maybe I could have stopped him. The trail led him deep into the mountains, far beyond the main hiking paths. For over 2 hours he followed the map, pushing through dense trees and uneven terrain. Eventually he found it, a small clearing in the woods, exactly where the X had been marked. Adrenaline coursed through him as he started digging. He expected something exciting, maybe even valuable. After a few minutes his shovel hit something soft. Carefully he unearthed a light blue plastic bag. His hands trembled as he opened it, but the contents weren't what he hoped for. Inside there were stacks of paper, talismans, each covered in strange, almost alien symbols. The markings were intricate and unsettling, filling every inch of the paper. Riku estimated there were thousands of them, all packed tightly in the bag. Riku understood their intended design. They were to ward off evil spirits and bring around a change of luck and circumstances. The sight of them made his skin crawl. He didn't know why, but something about those symbols felt wrong, like he shouldn't be looking at them. Panicking, he reburied the bag and left the clearing, practically running back to his car. The next day at work, Riku arrived to chaos. Someone had broken into the company's storage area overnight. Several items were stolen, including motherboards, memory sticks, and notably, the hard drive he'd copied the files from. The theft was strange enough, but the real shock came later. A coworker ran up to Riku, pale and shaking. "There's something on your car," she stammered. Confused, Riku followed her outside. There, stuck to his passenger side window, was one of the talismans he'd seen in the bag. The same unnerving symbols covered the paper. It didn't make sense. He hadn't taken any of the talismans with him. And when he'd left for work that morning, there hadn't been anything on his car. From that day forward, the talismans kept appearing. Every morning, there was a new one stuck to his car. Sometimes on the window, sometimes on the hood. Each day the number of talismans grew. One day there'd be 2, the next 3, then 5. Riku reported it to the police. They increased patrols in his neighborhood, but it didn't help. No one ever saw who was leaving them. I suggested setting up a hidden camera to catch whoever was doing it. "No," Riku said. His voice was trembling. "If I try to stop them, what if they hurt me?" I'd known Riku for years, and I'd never seen him this scared. He was paranoid, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound. 6 months later, Riku quit his job and moved without warning. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, not even me. His phone was disconnected and his social media accounts were deleted. I sometimes wonder if he finally escaped, but part of me doubts it. Whoever or whatever was stalking him seemed relentless. Even now when I see a talisman, I think of Riku. Is he still running? Or is someone still leaving those talismans for him, wherever he is? This happened about 2 years ago. I used the train to get to work, and on my route to the train station, I go through a few streets in my neighborhood. On one of the rundown buildings, on one of the rundown streets I go through, there's occasional graffiti on the walls. It was interesting because it was usually kind of a mosaic block pattern kind of graffiti instead of a tag or a drawing of a body part. My guess is that the graffiti artist, if you can call it art, was using some kind of stencil to achieve the desired results. I had seen other stencil designs in the news before. Tommy Lee Jones from the Boss Coffee adverts, and also Shinzo Abe. So one evening, as I was heading home from work through the streets of my town, I noticed something new on that wall of the building. From a distance, it just looked like a black stain on the wall, but when I got closer, it looked almost recognizable. It looked to me like a QR code. I wondered if my phone would read it if I tried it. I stopped, pulled my phone out of my pocket, and aimed it at the graffiti. The QR code worked. A URL appeared on the screen of my phone. I tapped it, and a low-resolution video began to play. The video wasn't that interesting. It was just a still shot at night of the alley, like someone had filmed the spot where the QR graffiti was. It was boring. I think it lasted for about 30 seconds, and I watched it to the end, and nothing of note happened. The URL was a standard kind of one, some kind of free website service kind of thing. I think the hosting website was called Tripod or something like that. It wasn't of any interest to me. It didn't lead me anywhere, so I thought that I'd just leave it alone. About a week later, I did get a little spooked when I noticed that the same stencil graffiti was on a telephone pole right by my house. It was weird. I was interested in scanning it though. I thought to myself, hey, why not? I was again sent to the same video hosting website. This time the image on screen was bright and the video had been taken in the daytime. For the first time, there was someone in the video. The video had several cuts in it. Every time there was a person holding their phone to the QR code, it would cut to another scene of another person approaching the wall with their phone in hand and arm outstretched, aimed at it. It looked like a collection of clips of people trying to read the QR code. I was all like, oh, maybe it's some advertising campaign or something, but then it dawned on me. Something didn't look right. The camera work was too shaky, not to mention any name of any product. It looked like someone was very deliberately filming whoever approached that wall. I watched with mild amusement and curiosity until I got a bit of a shock. I was among the people captured on that video. I got a chill. I didn't know I was being watched. Whoever filmed me was undoubtedly the person who created the QR code. How could I have missed him? He must have been stood so close to me. It was a really weird experience. I didn't like the idea of someone filming me secretly. What was worse was the fact that I didn't know the purpose of the video. Was it to intimidate me? If it was, then it worked. I double, if not triple checked the door was locked for a while after I saw that video. Fortunately, nothing bad has happened to me though. I wonder if the link had the ability to find out personal details. I don't know, maybe I wasn't what the person who made the QR code was looking for. So if a QR code randomly appears on a wall in your neighborhood, scan the area. Make sure no one's watching you.